What was so special about the Pool of Bethesda in Jerusalem? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of John on Walking Through the Bible. If you have a Bible with you, turn to John chapter 5. We're going to be reading from verses 1 to 15. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, John chapter 5, beginning of verse 1. After this, there was the feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool, which is called in Hebrew Bethesda, having 5 porches. In these lay a great multitude of sick people, blind, lame, paralyzed, waiting for the moving of the water. For an angel went down at a certain time into the pool and stirred up the water. Then whoever stepped in first after the stirring of the water was made well of whatever disease he had. Now a certain man was there who had an infirmity 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there, and knew that he already had been in that condition a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be made well?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no man to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, but while I am coming, another steps down before me." Jesus said to him, "Rise, take up your bed and walk." And immediately the man was made well, took up his bed and walked. And that day was the Sabbath. The Jews therefore said to him who was cured, "It was the Sabbath. It is not lawful for you to carry your bed." He answered them, "He who made me well said to me, 'Take up your bed and walk.'" Then they asked him, "Who is the man who said to you, 'Take up your bed and walk'?" But the one who was healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, a multitude being in that place. Afterward Jesus found him in the temple, and said to him, "See, you have been made well. Sin no more, lest a worse thing come upon you." The man departed and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well. In chapter 5, we come to another amazing story meant to show us that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, God himself. It occurs at the Feast of the Jews. It is not identified which feast this is, and could theoretically be any one of the religious feasts of the Jews like Passover, Pentecost, the Feast of Trumpets, or the Feast of Tabernacles, or even the Feast of Dedication, Hanukkah, or the Feast of Purim. In chapter 4, we had Jesus referring to the fact that the harvest was in 4 months, meaning that when he spoke those words, it was likely late November or early December. So perhaps this was the Feast of Dedication. But that would leave little time for the events at the end of John 4, so this feast can likely be ruled out. Perhaps then it's the Feast of Purim, which we will study in the book of Esther. This feast occurs in late February to early March, not too long before the Feast of Passover. And there certainly is a possibility, especially since John 6 says that the Feast of Passover was near. But there's a problem with that too, for in our study of Luke, we find that the feeding of the 5,000 took place late in Jesus' ministry in Galilee, before Jesus departed for Perea in the final 6 months before his crucifixion. So if John 5 is talking about Purim, then John 6 wouldn't be talking about the subsequent Passover weeks later, but one that occurred a year later. That means our uncertainty concerning the feast in John 5 is not diminished if we assume that John is talking about Purim here. The other possibility is that John is talking about Passover, the second Passover of Jesus' ministry. Why might this be the case? Because in John 4, John referred to the signs that we know Jesus performed at the Passover in John 2 as simply being done at the feast. And since whenever John is referring to a different feast in this book, he calls it by its name, like the Feast of Tabernacles or the Feast of Dedication, I am comfortable concluding the feast in John 5 is the second Passover of Jesus' ministry. And that Jesus would attend this feast would not be abnormal, for this was one of the pilgrimage feasts for all males in Israel to attend. While in Jerusalem, Jesus was near the sheep gate, a gate where sheep were brought into Jerusalem at a pool known as Bethesda. It was believed by the Jews that when the water was stirred up, supposedly by an angel, the first person who went into the pool after it was stirred up would be healed. It should be noted that the end of verse 3 and the entirety of verse 4 is missing in some of the ancient manuscripts, but that alone shouldn't rule against its authenticity. I suspect that it's not in some manuscripts due to the doubtfulness by the copyists that this pool had any healing qualities, nor that an angel came and stirred up the water. However, if it isn't authentic, I ask, why would a later scribe add it? Because the addition doesn't add to or take anything away from the story. The only reason I could think of as to why it would be added later was to explain why people gathered around this pool, and so they invoke some Jewish tradition. But if this is authentic of John, that is likely the exact reason why he added it too. For note that Jesus, in performing this miracle, passes over whether or not the Pool of Bethesda had any healing power. Jesus didn't stir up the waters himself, nor did he use any of the water in this miracle. He simply healed the man who for 38 years had been afflicted with a disease that caused him to be mostly lame. So the way I read this passage is that John wasn't affirming or denying anything that the Jews thought about the Pool of Bethesda. He was simply using it as a stepping stone to get to the actual miracle itself, which is the third sign that John was using to show that Jesus was the Christ, God himself. And since John didn't say either way, we will refrain from speculation on the matter. How then would this miracle show that Jesus was the Christ? Well, first of all, it showed the all-powerful nature of Jesus. He didn't have to wait for the waters to be stirred. He didn't even have to actually use the water. He spoke the miracle, and it was so, for the man could immediately stand up and walk. Second, in telling this man to take up his bed and walk on the Sabbath, Jesus showed that he was the Lord of the Sabbath and could apply the regulations perfectly. This man later got in trouble for carrying his bed on the Sabbath, and under normal circumstances, that would be true. But Jesus had unexpectedly just healed him. He couldn't leave his bed in the middle of the street simply because it was the Sabbath. It was therefore necessary for him to take his bed home, which is of course what Jesus told him to do. And then finally, when Jesus later met the man in the temple, Jesus told the man that since he was healed, not to sin anymore, lest a worse thing happen to him. Now, not all disease is the result of sin, but some of it may be. And the fact that Jesus knew that something this man had done had caused his illness shows us his all-knowing nature, an attribute that only God has. Now, when the man was originally confronted by the Jews about carrying his bed on the Sabbath, he didn't know who Jesus was, for Jesus had withdrawn into the crowd. But after meeting Jesus in the temple, the man knew, and so he went and told the Jews. We'll see their reaction to Jesus, Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. Tomorrow is Victoria Day in Ontario, Canada, so we will be taking a one-day break and return, the Lord willing, on Tuesday, May 25th, 2021. When we return, we hope you'll join us for our discussion of John chapter 5, verses 16 to 23, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.